Welcome to another episode of Get Motivated's Exploratory Podcast, where we explore all things related to veterinary well-being. And we're so excited you joined us today. And we actually have a really cool guest. His name is Dr. Matt Holland, and he's going to be sharing a little bit of his story, some of his tools, some of his strategies, and his hopes for the profession, what he's actually up to these days. So with that being said, Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm flattered you asked.
Yeah. We're flattered that you actually took us up on our offer to be on this podcast, and so with that being said, just go ahead and tell our audience a little bit about who you are, like where you're from, which vet school you went to, and then sort of what you're up to now as it relates to the veterinary community.
Yeah, so I was born in a town just outside Chicago called Libertyville, and that's where I'm speaking to you from now. So everything in between is I wanted to be a professional baseball player when I grew up, and when I didn't make the high school team, that was the writing on the wall that I needed to find something else to do. So I thought, if I can't play sports, then I can write about sports or cover sports, and studied journalism in undergrad, and went on to do video production, like television production for like any sport you can think of. I did hockey, I did lacrosse, I did polo, I did like everything. Um, and throughout that throughout that first part of my life after college, uh, I realized, well, all my jobs were seasonal, like with a sports season, and so I had bills to pay and time to kill. So I went to Craigslist and found a job as a dog walker. That was my first off-season job, and then I went back to working in sports the next season. But I was like daydreaming about working with animals, and in the next off season, I went and got a job at a shelter, and then I went back to working in sports TV and was thinking about animals again. And I, like, long story short, went and applied to veterinary school. But I still had to get my prerequisites because those were not included in the journalism degree. So,
Or the
Wow.
dog walking, right?
or the dog walking.
Wow.
Although one of
That's
the
awesome, man.
one of the guys who wrote my letter of recommendation for vet school was the guy who owned the dog walking company. So it's a small world in the
Ooh.
vet. Um, Nico,
Mm-hmm.
Nico
That's cool.
Chrysopoulos, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He went to Minnesota. He's like TikTok famous with his daughters now.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, so I graduated from Illinois in 2017. I went in thinking I was going to be the next James Harriet. And the guy who taught those classes also taught public health and policy. And I love that guy. I was always staying after class and bugging him and asking him questions and like picking his brain. And he was like, it seems like the things you're interested in are more like bigger picture, like, herd animal, population animal things, not necessarily like treating individual cases. And I was like, yeah, I think I agree. And he's like, you should think about this fellowship I did. It's in Washington, D.C., and it's all about like science policy. And I was like, that sounds really cool. I didn't even know that existed.
Mm.
And I did that. First thing after vet school, moved to D.C., my wife and I, and worked for a member of Congress for a year. Her name's Sherry Bustos. She's a member of the House of Representatives. Um, and after that, I did another fellowship. That one was with the USDA. Um, and the agency was called the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. It's a mouthful. And another mouthful is the Veterinary Medicine Loan Repayment Program, the VMLRP,
Okay.
which is what I was working on while at the USDA. And about a year and a half into that, it was a 2-year fellowship. So right as I was ending, I told all my mentors that I was looking for work. I was looking for a new job, and if they knew of anything, that they should let me know. And my current boss, who was and is a mentor, said, have you ever thought about working for Vin? And I said, no. And what would I do at Vin? And he said, I don't know, let's have a conversation. So another long story short, I work at Vin. And I got that job, and it was remote work. My wife got a new job with the Red Cross, which was also remote work. And we moved from DC back to Libertyville, back to my parents' house I grew up in. And the plan was for us to look for a place in Chicago. And then the pandemic hit like 3 weeks after we moved. So we haven't moved yet. And that's it. Yeah. Now I got to breathe.
Gotcha. So you weren't one of those people, I guess, who has always wanted to be a vet since they were in like kindergarten or since they came out of the womb, I like to joke and say.
No, I very, very late bloomer. I struggled in science courses as a high schooler, and I think I remember saying to the counselor, like, I'm really interested in what I ended up doing, which was like covering sports. And I had worked for the high school newspaper, and it made a lot of sense. And I was like, I kind of am interested in veterinary medicine too. Like, I've always liked the idea of being that. And the counselor was like, I don't think so, buddy. Like, I don't think with your pedigree, I don't think it's going to happen.
But you know, I think that's so important though, because oftentimes we have these glimpses of things we'd like to do in life, of this dream, if you will. And I believe that sometimes it's a combination. It's a combination of like those different things, right? So it's a combination of your journalism, kind of what you're doing now with Vin, and you're doing podcasts and, you know, covering stories and interviewing people and things of that nature. And then also at the same time, you're doing that veterinary part of your dream as well, right? And when I look at my own career, even, you know, when I was a kid, I used to be cutting grass, and I would always think of myself as performing on stage as like a rapper or like a performer or something like that, right? Or like some type of rock star. And I didn't pursue that part of it, like the music part, but I'm on stages now, like as a speaker within the veterinary community, and I am doing business. And so when I was graduating from veterinary school, my counselor asked me, he's like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I like business and marketing. I was kind of a business and marketing major in high school, if you will. And then I was also interested in animal sciences and stuff like that too, because my brother was an animal science major. And so when I got to my college in North Carolina A&T at orientation, they were like, what's your major? And I was like, I don't know. Any, meeny, miny, mode. When I was in high school, I was like, any, meeny, miny, mode between business and animal science. And I just picked one, didn't even look to see which one I actually landed on, and just kind of went with it and didn't pay it any mind. And then they said, you're an animal science major, go to Webb Hall. And now years later, here we are, like I have the business and you know, I'm a veterinarian and all these different things. So I think for our listeners, if you're like a pre-veterinary student and you had a dream to do this or dream to do that, then maybe you can do both, kind of like Matt has done here, where somehow, some way, like the stars aligned, and he's kind of doing some journalism stuff and some animal science stuff, or veterinary stuff too.
And you know what I also find to be really inspiring is that you've had quite the career already, right? Is that you've spent time in different places and in different jobs doing different things, and each step was a little bit different than the last. And for me, that's like foreign, because I spent 11 years at my first practice. And so, I mean, taking risks, moving places, going to different people, going to different businesses, that's sort of scary. I've outgrown that a bit now in my entrepreneurial days, but you know, that was like a foreign concept for me early on. So I find that really inspiring.
Well, I'm glad you find it inspiring. At the beginning of my career, I got to be honest, it was forced. I had no other choice but to, like, I had a contract with the Big Ten Network, and it was for 6 months. And so then I needed something else to do. And so I got a position as a dog walker. And then I had another contract that I signed, and it was like bouncing around, kind of like the gig economy, just like doing what I could. And then I remember when I finally decided to pursue veterinary school, I was kind of mad at myself. I was like, man, why did you waste so much time and like earn that degree that's useless? And like, why did you do all that if you're going to go to veterinary school and you're going to be behind and you're going to be older than all your classmates? And like, you basically just wasted so much time. And now I could not be more thankful for that life experience heading into that.
And that overlay, right, that really blends, because I think in a lot of things that was something that always troubled me growing up, is that I think in our culture we're so specialized and you're so pigeonholed, but we learn now that when you're a little less specialized, that's where real innovation can take place, because you get to, blend journalism and veterinary medicine and your life experience. You get to blend all of these different things to create something completely new at times.
Yeah.
That's, pretty unique.
Yeah. And like what Quincy was saying, like how, and what you just said, how I get to do a little bit of both in this current role. Like I envision myself as like my life's mission is to take care of the people who take care of animals. And I feel so lucky that I get to do that at my job. Like that's my employer's mission too. So, how cool.
Okay. So moving forward, Matt, do you have a favorite quote?
All right. So I knew this question was coming, and this morning I woke up and I was like, I still don't have a favorite quote. What is my favorite quote? And I was looking around, and it was a good thing, like a good inspirational thing to do in the morning. And I looked up some James Baldwin quotes, and I have 5 of them. I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but the first one is, ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have.
Okay. Do you know what's really interesting is, oh my gosh, you guys aren't going to believe this. I'm reading, just before this interview, I was reading a book by Brene Brown, and I took a picture of this quote, and it was from James Baldwin. She refers to him a lot in this particular book. But I'm thinking to myself, who is this James Baldwin that she keeps referring to? So this is the quote. Yeah. So I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate so stubbornly is because they sense once the hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with the pain. That is so profound. Like, who is this James Baldwin?
Oh, who is this James Baldwin?
I can't wait to go down that rabbit hole.
Where do we start?
He's your person, huh?
I think, and I read an article about him this morning, and the first paragraph was, these are all one-word sentences. It was like, author, activist, philanthropist.
Like, yeah. Is he like, did he write the book As a Man Thinketh or something like that, maybe? Or is that him?
I don't know.
Or is that somebody else? I think he may have written the book. I'm going to look it up real quick.
We're going to go down that rabbit hole.
But Renee, it's funny that you said you were reading Brene Brown before you joined us, because we were talking about Brene Brown before you joined us.
Oh no, that's totally James Allen. Okay, I love it. All right, so James Allen wrote As a Man Thinketh, not James Baldwin. Okay.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm reading Braving the Wilderness. So tell me, the quote that you chose, does that mean something to you? Why does that resonate with you?
Yeah. So, and this gets into my mental health journey, like where I feel like it started, because I like, nobody ever told me nobody ever told me they were concerned about me before vet school. And nobody ever recommended that I seek out a therapist or like, have any kind of like intervention with my mental health before vet school. And They did a little bit during vet school, and I went and saw a therapist a few times, and it I think wasn't a good fit, and like I just wasn't persistent about finding a good fit, and I was, I gave myself the excuse of being so busy, um, and I wasn't taking any meds in school, and when I got out of school and moved to DC, like I mentioned, I was working for a member of the House. She's a Democrat, and the House was Republican controlled, the Senate was Republican controlled, and it was a Republican president. Um, and I mean, we don't need to get into politics other than like to answer your question, why it resonated with me. I thought the last administration was ignorance allied with power, and sometimes it was malice allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. The second quote is right there with it, which is, people are trapped in history and history is trapped in them. And I really saw in that experience in DC that, the wheels are already in motion. By the time those blocks are in place, there's not a whole lot you can do. Like, what are we going to do? Write an angry email to the president and tell him he's a jerk? Like you change it in the next election and you change it in elections down further. But for that moment in time, like, we can't do a lot if the Republicans stick together and vote together. And now the opposite is true for Democrats. Right. But I felt kind of trapped. And I felt trapped by this mean enemy, this like ferocious enemy. And I was angry about it. And I didn't really do much besides it. And it ties right into the third, the one that you said that you saw in the book, which is like, I was clinging to hate because, I think on some deep level, I knew that I was going to have to reckon with the pain. Right. If I peeled off that layer of anger and hate. And I talked with my therapist right before this meeting, so it might get intense, but because we talked about this, but I would, and I mentioned my wife worked for the Red Cross, so she was gone for almost that entire first year. So it was real easy for me to go home and have the anger be dealt with. Maybe I talk to my friend on the phone. Maybe I watch a Cubs game. Maybe I drink too much. And then maybe I drink too much got to, I am drinking too much. Right. That's what worked. And it was functional enough to go to work the next day. And I was like, okay, well, I guess this is like me adapting to my circumstances. Like, it's
like, this is life.
It's more than the 2 drinks that a doctor recommends a day, but it's like, sometimes it's like only 3 or 4. And like, I feel fine. So, like, everything's all good, and I'm exercising regularly. So it's, again, giving myself permission to like get away with something. But yeah, that's well, I'll just finish the story, I guess.
Yeah, keep going, because you're rolling right into it.
Yeah, we'll go through all 5. So I really did think that once I got out of that first fellowship and into the second, that things would get better, because I thought, like, I'd be working on like boring agriculture stuff in some stodgy office. Like, I wouldn't be meeting with the Parkland survivors, for instance, like, which is something I did in my old job. And it did get worse, because the Secretary of Agriculture decided to relocate my agency and another agency from DC to KC, to Kansas City, but they only gave employees 30 days notice. And I guess I am getting a bit into politics, but I don't know if anybody knows Mick Mulvaney. He was the director of the Office of Management and Budget, but he said, like, while this process was happening, that it's nearly impossible to fire a federal worker. But guess what happened with this relocation? More than half the people quit, which is true. And like, it's what they were trying to do. They were trying to get people to leave. But that was horrible from my perspective, because people were put in this rock and a hard place position of having to uproot their families, sell their homes, move everything to Kansas City with less than 30 days notice, or quit, or not have something. Some people got new jobs, not many. Like, that's not a lot of time to get a new job. And they were essentially trying to kneecap the scientific part of the USDA, and they did. I mean, they have since been able to hire new people in Kansas City, and I don't know if they're at 100% yet, but basically I was going in, like, ever since that announcement came down, I was going into work, and it was like, I don't know if you guys have read Harry Potter, but it was like Dementors were in the building, just like literally sucking the soul out of everybody. And I felt so bad for them. And I like, on top of it, I had survivor's guilt because as a fellow, I didn't have to move. So, and my job was okay. Like, so I was walking around like with these people who were all day, every day saying like, what are we supposed to do? Like, our lives have been forever changed. And I was like, well, that's actually not that bad for me. And
Wow.
I was like, so it like, the hate grew, the anger grew, and I started having these mood swings, these like drastic mood swings. I remember one time my wife and I were sitting there watching TV, and I just started crying, and she's like, what's wrong? And I was like, everything. Like nothing happened just now. Like, there's, I didn't just think of a sad memory. Like, I just started crying because everything fucking sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse my language, but I like those mood swings lasted for about 1 to 2 days, and I started seeing a therapist then. But my healthcare in DC only allowed me to see a therapist every 6 weeks, which is not nearly enough.
Right.
And but it was the same thing, like I mentioned earlier in the story. Like, it was manageable enough. Like, I could still do my job.
Right.
Like, sometimes I could sense it coming, and I could like hold it off till the weekend, or like, I just like got through the day,
Yeah.
But when we moved here, the mood swings got worse. So they became more frequent and more intense, and they lasted for longer. And one of the first things I did when I got here was get a therapist and a psychiatrist, because at this point, like, I knew something was up. And the therapist was okay when he showed up to appointments, so like not okay actually. And the psychiatrist, I think, could have been a good fit if we had in-person appointments, but it just wasn't a good fit over the phone. And I felt things getting worse. She being the psychiatrist, started me on an antidepressant, but it didn't help anything. And I was sensing that it might have been making things worse, but it was getting harder and harder for me to tell. And I started telling people at work, because like, I didn't know what to do really. I was like, nothing's working.
Right.
And these people might notice that I am like, absent, or not as productive as I should be, or they might notice something's wrong, essentially. And so I just try to be proactive about it and tell them like, hey, just so you guys know, like, this is what I'm going through. And I'll lead into my fourth quote, which is a bit more uplifting, I think. And it is, love takes off masks that we fear we cannot live without, and no, we cannot live within. And certainly my family, being my parents and my wife, were supportive. They were extraordinarily supportive. They still are. But a truly unexpected act of love came from my colleagues. I don't know if they had a meeting without me or if they both independently told me. I'll never know. They'll never tell. But they both strongly encouraged me to talk to somebody who is associated with the VIN Foundation group, Vets for Vets, and her name's Bree Montana, and then Bree put me in touch with Michelle, who is a psychotherapist here in Chicago. She's a human psychotherapist slash veterinarian, like feline boarded veterinarian.
Okay.
And former journalist. So she's
right.
Yeah,
firing all cylinders.
I know, yeah. She is like Jill of all trades. And she referred me to my current therapist, Zach, and my current psychiatrist, Dr. Moss. And Dr. Moss, after the first time she met me, she was like, I don't know for certain, but I think you might be on the bipolar spectrum. And it doesn't really matter where, like it matters that we treat it. So let's focus on that. And she said, but I'm not sure. So we'll do a follow-up appointment in a few weeks and I'll get to know you a little bit more and you can tell me what's been going on.
And Matt, what's the time frame for this? Was this,
this
3 years ago, a year ago?
This is like last summer.
Last summer, okay. All right.
Yeah, so my wife and I moved to here, to Illinois a year ago, almost exactly, like to the day. And the first therapist and psychiatrist were about 3 months for like spring. And so in the summer, I got with the new ones. And the second appointment with her, she said, yeah, now I'm sure you're on the bipolar spectrum. And it's because the antidepressant I was on exacerbates depressive symptoms in bipolar people.
Right.
So like it actually was making things worse.
Right.
And, that I was both thankful and appalled. I was like,
right.
Wow. Yeah. So started me on a different antidepressant and a mood stabilizer, and started seeing Zach, my therapist, and was like headed in the right direction, or like in a good new direction. But there was an unexpected death in the family not long after that, which was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. And so I was really depressed after that and ended up going to the hospital. And it was all virtual, but like for 4 weeks, it was all day, every day. And then like I took a leave from work, and then for 3 weeks, it was part-time, like half days. And that ended on Christmas Eve. So it was a nice Christmas present to be done with that. And I started to feel like myself in like 1 or 2 weeks, like I feel now, like I feel today. And it probably wasn't long after that where I reached out to Quincy about like meeting and maybe doing a podcast. And because we had met, I think, or you had met one of my colleagues, Tony, during the AVMA Economics Summit. But yeah, like I had a big list of stuff I wanted to do. I just like didn't have the motivation or energy to do it. And I finally started, thank goodness, started feeling good. And I was like, all right, let's get to business.
Yeah.
So yeah, the last quote is, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And
wow.
That reminds me of two things. It reminds me of the Serenity Prayer, and it also reminds me of Mario. I don't know if either of you two have ever played, but like that ghost that would chase you until you looked at it, and then it would freeze. And then you would like keep running through the level and like doing your stuff, and
I've been playing with my daughter. I've been playing on the Super Nintendo.
Oh yeah,
yeah, Super Mario World, and then yes, so I definitely know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and then it would freeze, and
I
like
think they call it a Shy Guy or something like that.
Yeah, that's a Shy Guy.
Yeah.
And like it won't be changed until it's faced, and I know that's a very literal interpretation of that, but what I learned but like with Zach and while being in the hospital program is that, it's like actually something I already knew, which is like, it's like vet school or like an exercise routine or cooking or anything. Like people can cheer you on, people can root for you and say, you're the best, you got this, but like nobody can actually do it for you. And like, I didn't feel like facing the depression because I was depressed, which I know is kind of like a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
But I like, once I finally faced it and started putting in the work, it made a hell of a lot of difference for me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for taking us on that journey. And I think it's really important that, I know the one favorite thing, it's so hard. And for our listeners, you guys are going to hear Gavin in the background, but I'm just going to go with this because it's too important for me to sit on. This discussion that we're having right now, it's so important. And your experience is so very raw for me. We talked a little bit, our last conversation, last month about my experience, but for me, that was, 15 years ago. But when we really start to talk about it, I can feel and smell and taste and all of these very like vivid, the same experience. When I moved to North Carolina in 2011, that was the first thing that I did as well. I was under a mental health professional who I was scared to leave because she was the first therapist who I really connected with in my early 20s. And actually her name was Renee. And I think that's, again, I think that is something that, you connect with. I mean, she got me. And for someone to get me, I mean, that was a huge deal. And so it was really scary to move to North Carolina, but that was one of the first things that I did. And when big things happen in my life, that's something I think about, is okay, I need to turn to someone. Now it's a little bit different. I'm way out of the woods, and but they're there. They're there for you. And I've talked with my friends. I like having these conversations more and more because I just had a friend recently who she too was she went into the hospital last fall, got out right before Christmas, and the meds were exacerbating exacerbating certain symptoms, hiding other symptoms, and creating this cloud in which, she couldn't, it was like, where am I? And she was aware enough to, leading up to that, be able to differentiate what was happening on account of the meds and then what wasn't. And for me, that was the tipping point because unlike you, I mean, I was on a handful of medications. So anti-anxiety medications, antidepressants, so that was like the daily medications, right? But then also the supplemental for panic attacks and insomnia and all of these things that were adding to my mood swings and my pendulum swinging from one side to the other. And they wanted to, add another treatment, and I was like, something's got to change, right? Something has to change bigger here. And it's not until, I was able to really look at things with a different lens that I could take that mask off and kind of stop hiding behind all of these different fragmented pieces of what I was experiencing, and then be able to really, transform that. And Brene Brown, speaking of, right, she talks about those masks, she talks about the masks. And I think that for me, when I was in college and that's a fear, right? Is that we have this persona that we have to live up to. And that, I've talked with a coachee just a couple months ago, and she thinks, why, like my problems aren't, like you were saying, it's sort of functional. That my problems aren't that big. There's other people with bigger problems, and the things that we convince ourselves of, it's so intense. And so I want to give a chance for Quincy to reply as well. But I think it's really important that, you were able to advocate for yourself, and that you had the support. And like you said, not just of your family and friends, but surprisingly of your colleagues. That's something, my colleagues were my work family at the time, and they were the ones who got me through it. And so by not hiding, that's, to me, what saved my life. Had I continued to hide behind it and really journey on alone, or just chalk it up to denial, my life could look really different. And so, like I said, I want to give him a chance to reply, but I want to then talk about, what is your approach then to your well-being, and, how has that evolved over time, just, with this in mind, then, even without it.
Yeah, so I only have a few comments on that, and again, thank you for sharing your story and that journey, as Renee stated. But the things that sort of jump out at me are one thing that you said at the end of it's basically that you can't delegate your own mental health and your own well-being. Like, you can't really put that off onto someone else. Or it's kind of like doing push-ups. Like, if you want a bigger chest, you've got to do the push-ups. You can't even pay somebody enough money to do the push-ups for you. It wouldn't matter if you're a trillionaire or a billionaire. Like, you can't pay somebody else to do that work for you. And so it's really cool to see you actually go and put in that work. And then the other part too is the stigma. And I've seen this with people close to me, as well as other veterinary professionals and students, where they're, I want to say, courageous enough to even go to a mental health professional. So I kind of want to pick your brain on that before we maybe move on. Like, there is a stigma associated with going to see a mental health professional. I think that's kind of like a common thing with just humans in general. Like, how did you bypass that? Like, what was it for you that allowed you to say, I need to see a mental health professional? Like, you mentioned that, but like, how do you actually get to that? Or it's just common sense for you?
No, not just common sense. It reminds me of, I mean, so like sometimes my therapist right now will ask me, like, hey, do you ever have those thoughts that you had last year? And I'm like, yeah, sometimes, but I don't really think about it a whole lot. And he's like, do you know why? And I say, well, probably the biggest reason is I don't want to go back to the hospital. Like, deterrence. And so really, like, I wish I had some like brave story of how I bypassed the stigma, but it was like encouragement from my wife. And when I say encouragement, like, sometimes I mean like strong encouragement. Like the time when I started crying in the middle of the movie, she was like, listen, I am happy to like be with you and hear what you're sad about, but you have to go see a therapist. Like I can't, I'm not trained to deal with this. And like, I don't know how to deal with this. Like I love you and I support you and I'll talk with you about whatever you want, but like you have to go see a therapist. And that was like, I mean, I guess fortunately I didn't push back on her. I said like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
And I did, but no, it was like from her past experience, like she had an experience earlier in her life where therapy really helped her a lot. And she was like, you gotta, like, I've been bringing this up for a while and like, you gotta go, you have to go.
And I think that's really powerful because we talk about it Get Motivated. We talk about support networks and support systems or building your well-being army or your well-being tribe, if you will, often because you can proactively put people almost like your wife around you, even if they're not your significant other. You can just kind of know that this type of person, they understand, mental health before you ever even have a life challenge or a veterinary challenge. And I think if you're going into veterinary medicine, just kind of knowing of how difficult and how challenging, how stressful and overwhelming it can be, it would be wise to seek out the counsel of someone who understands well-being and mental health. Finding these different communities like the one that the Venn Foundation has put together, so that if you're having challenges, and if you do start, crying in the middle of a movie, that you have someone to actually go, that you have someone to express that to, and you feel comfortable in doing that. I remember I was in vet school. I was taking like it was called Oxy Elite Pro. It was a pill. It was like a weight loss pill, and it gave you like not an appetence, but what do you call it? Like where it's an appetite suppressant. But it also, I think, sent me into like a depressive episode because I was sitting in class one day, I just started crying, and I had no idea why. And I expressed that to some people close to me, but no one has ever suggested that Quincy Hawley go see a mental. It's never to this day been recommended to me by a trusted person to go see a mental health professional or to consider seeing a mental health professional. So well, I think that having someone like your wife in your support network and proactively seeking that out could be a really good strategy for something like that.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, I remember when I met her, she told me about that, and I was like, that seems like good to have around, and I don't know why, and I might not know for a while, but it seems like someone with that kind of experience is like good to have on your team. Yeah.
So do you have, do you have a certain approach now that you take to your mental health and your well-being that maybe, you developed over time, whether it was sort of before this experience or even, after this experience?
Yeah. But before, I mean, for a while, I have been singing the praises of sleep and exercise. Like if you could like bottle up and put in pill form all the benefits that sleep and regular exercise give you, like you'd be a millionaire. Um, I, like, and you don't have to be an Olympic level athlete for exercise. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about going on like a 15-minute walk each day. Like that's enough. Like if you raise your heart rate for 15-20 minutes a day, like that's fine. That's way more than like sitting on your butt and not doing anything. And it depends on what kind of goals you have there too. But like that's honestly that's what I'm doing right now is like going on walks most days and going on a hike or two, like a longer hike on the weekend. And sleep is like sacred to me. I will not let anything get in my way of sleep. It
Huge for mental health. Yeah.
Yeah, And the thing that was like really annoying while all that was happening, what I was describing is like, I had sleep and exercise the whole time. So I was like, yeah, I'm doing it. Like I'm doing those things that you're telling me to do. And like,
Right.
I still feel terrible. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes like the drinking, early on, like drinking was a coping mechanism for me, and not to excess, but then the more I studied the sleep science and sleep research, I recognized that, even though it seemed like a glass of wine or something would lull you to sleep, the quality of your sleep changes. And so it's actually counterintuitive. And for me, it helps me understand, understanding like the why or the science behind things helps me get actually the motivation to changing those habits.
Yeah.
And then, of course, just at some point, it began to feel really awful as I got older to even have like a glass of wine. It felt like my brain was dehydrated. And so yeah, I think, those things kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah, those two like have always been there. I mean, they weren't always there like in vet school for sure. But the two things now that I was doing this occasionally, like sporadically before, and now I'm doing it every day, is writing haiku. For some reason, like that is a really like fun. It's fun for me, like a fun thing to do. And it's usually about either something I thought about in the morning or like a current event. And it doesn't even really matter what it turns out to be. It just matters that I go through the practice of it.
Right.
And then same thing with meditation, is something that I, again, used to do, like, I don't know, when I had time or when I felt like it, but now I make sure to do it every day. And that can look like a lot of different things to me anyway. Like I have a loose definition around that word. Like you don't have to be sitting or with your eyes closed or like with candles or anything. Like I feel like walking alone is meditating, like mindful meditation.
Yes.
Or if I decide to take a nap during the day, I meditate myself to sleep. And I know there are people who might cringe at that. Like you're not supposed to fall asleep while you meditate, but like, whatever.
That's
like
how I got into meditation, was guided meditations for sleep, because I was battling insomnia. And so originally it was guided meditations to sleep. And then my practice grew from there. But I would do like, even then, guided pain meditations. And it really started with the guided meditations. But I agree with you, and really some of like Tich, gosh, I always mispronounce his name, but it's Thich Nhat Hanh, and he writes about mindfulness, and he has a book called Happiness, and walking meditation is in there. And so you can have these meditative experiences that, like you said, that might, be different. There's thousands of techniques of ways to meditate.
Yeah, well, I was having one yesterday. I was lying down for a nap and like letting the thoughts pass through and noticing what was going on, and then I shot up because I remembered that you all sent me questions, and I was like, oh shoot, I haven't looked at the questions. And so I'll take a nap after this and like pick up where I left off.
You mentioned something earlier. You said, you were doing the things that you're still doing, right? So the sleep and exercise, and yet you were still struggling, or you're still having this experience. Do you notice now that you have a better handle on, knowing that while those things were in place, there were still other things at play? When stress comes up in your life, are there major stressors that you know of? And like, if you have these daily routines, are there other things in your toolkit that you bring to the ready when things do begin to, elevate, that that maybe would be different than like your daily routines?
Yeah. And it's something we've already touched on, which is advocating for myself. So I've really worked on this with my therapist because I mean, I used to be the person who said yes to everything. And like, I really don't like letting people down. And I think those two are related. But sometimes when my wife says, like, you know, do you want to go on a walk? I'll say no. I I would rather go on a walk alone. And like the first time that happened, she kind of took it hard and she was like, "What? Why? Like, why don't you want to go on a walk with me?" But I advocated for myself and I was like, I need time for myself. And like that is not a thing that was characteristic for me to say. And it was hard for me to say the first time. And like I practiced with my therapist. I was like, wait, yeah, that actually is okay and it's healthy to like express my needs. And because I was like, it's not that big of a deal to just go on a walk with my wife, like because she feels good about it. So like that's a good thing, right? And he's like,
Right.
well, like not if you it's not a good thing if it's not what you want, and you like could advocate for what you want. And like sure enough, i I felt like really good about not only having the walk to myself, but like going through that process of advocating for myself, because I like can, you practice this skill. Therapist told me that I could advocate for myself, and that it not only I could, but I should. And it it really helped me to be able to gain that skill that I didn't have. I mean, I can't imagine saying no at work a year ago,
Right.
and I can now because I have and I do, and it's great. Like it's empowering.
Yeah.
And
So
I think
that
the big part of that too is that it's not being selfish. It's not being selfish for you to say no because you'd rather go and do something that's sort of better for yourself. And I believe that's where a lot of the veterinary caregivers, maybe some of our listeners, get into trouble, is that they think that by sacrificing their own self-care and their own preferences that they're doing a good thing. But in actuality, extreme altruism like that is honestly, and I think one of my mentors, Waddle, says that that's worse than extreme greed sometimes, right? It's being extremely altruistic. And because it's better for you and you're going to feel better. And in essence, the interaction that you have with your wife later in the day, maybe later in the week, later in the month, will be less resentful. You'll feel uplifted, and things of that nature. And so the big part that I think gets a lot of people is like, well, what if that other person feels bad? Like, for example, what if your wife feels bad, right? And that's not for you to get into. You know
That's
what
a
I'm
her
saying?
problem.
That,
Yeah.
that's a her problem. And in all due respect to your wife or to whoever the other party is, like if they have a problem with you taking care of yourself, go back and listen to that. They have a problem
Mhm.
with that. And it was really hard for me. I've been a people pleaser my entire life. And even now, as an entrepreneur and as a well being enthusiast, sometimes I have to step out of things that maybe I've even committed to, right? Like I know I committed to doing this or being here at this time, but I realize internally that being at this place at this time is going to be worse for me and in essence worse for everyone around me and everyone I could possibly impact. So I just wanted to say kudos to you for discovering that and actually advocating for yourself, because it's a conundrum. It really is, and sometimes it seems really selfish and really like a-hole-ish, but in actuality it's the most one of the most profound things that we can do for ourselves and for others.
Yeah, it's a problem with the culture, not with ourselves. Like, I
Right.
think the culture we're in here in the US, I don't know about other countries, but like it's looked down upon to do that, and it's hard to break free from that, but it's worth doing, and it's worth learning that skill.
So that's the thing, and what you guys are talking about, I think there's balance, right? There's balance. If you were to constantly, just be saying like, I don't want to walk with you ever, right? Like that could be then a shared problem, right? And so it's really about balance in life, but the boundaries, knowing what boundaries are and then how to establish them, are two different things. And so I think I want to highlight for the listeners that you practice with someone. You practice with a trained professional, and you were practicing something that you were trying to approach with compassion, and you weren't trying to be like we kind of all said like an a-hole about it, because you're wanting to help the whole by serving yourself. And so when we're talking to our caregivers, like this is the heart of everything, is we've got to be filling up our own cup. And as caregivers, it is, it's just ingrained in our archetypes that we come last. And so you're right, when it comes to the culture, whether it be the American Western culture or our industry, or whatever role we play outside of the industry, females, etc., is just that we come last, and that if you communicate a boundary, that you must be an a-hole, right? And so these are some belief shifts that I think we are starting to see change, because we're seeing more and more people who aren't assholes exercising healthy, established boundaries in a really compassionate and balanced way, right? And so it is possible, and there is an alternative, and the tools and the skills are out there, because without that, you're absolutely right. We're spread way too thin and too many things, and then when we have these outbursts or these eruptions, we go, oh well, it could have been easily solved with a healthy boundary.
And so along those lines, and with that being said, so we're approaching an hour. This conversation could easily go on for 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
Right? We could do that, and maybe Matt will do a part 2. I think would be even greater. I know Renee has some other questions and things of that nature, but can you touch on some of the things that the Venn Foundation? I remember you talked about it a little bit with us in terms of some of the mental health and well-being resources that you guys are providing. I want to give you an opportunity to touch on that before we wrap up. Because like, what if somebody doesn't have the money to go to a mental health professional or something like that?
Yeah, you're teeing me up. Wow. Yeah. Well, if somebody doesn't have the money, then they should go to Vets for Vets, which is a Venn Foundation resource. And I mean, I know I'm smiling here. It doesn't sound like a salesman, but A, there's nothing to sell. And B, like it saved my life. It literally saved my life. That's who, when I talked about Bree, who put me in touch with Michelle, like they are behind the Vets for Vets. And so I think that story has a different ending without their intervention. And so you have like an initial call with Bree, and anything you're struggling with, anything under the sun, depression, anxiety, loss of a loved one, stressed out at work, like really, you name it, like burnout, anything. She kind of like she'll listen to you and figure out who to put you in touch with. And that's what happened with me. Like Bree put me in touch with Michelle, who then referred me to like professionals in my area. They also have confidential support groups. So you can go on, like you go on Zoom, I think it's for an hour, and you have like a support group that you are like a cohort that you're with for a certain amount of time, and you talk with them. And I've never done that through Vets for Vets. I have done group therapy at the hospital program that I was at, and I found that to be the most helpful part of the program. So like that hospital program was 75% lecture based and 25% group therapy based, and the group talked to each other. And I loved that part, and I thought I was going to hate it. I was like, I'm not cut out for group therapy. Like, I want a one-on-one attention. I don't know what is in it for me. And you probably can't know until you try it. So I don't know how to tell anybody how it's like, or what you can get out of it. But oh, go ahead.
I'm sold on it personally, man. And so where would I go to actually sign up? Is there a website or a Facebook group? Like where do our listeners go if they want to get some free help?
So if you go to vinfoundation.org,
and we'll put these links in the description of this podcast or video, whatever it happens to be.
That's the landing site for all the Vin Foundation resources. And
so it's vinfoundation.org, you said?
Yep. And I mean, this is kind of long, but if you want it, it's like vinfoundation.org/resources/vets for vets. And
I put it on our Facebook page and our Facebook group after our recording with you last month. So there is a shout out on the page too.
So you've got that link, Renee?
Yeah.
Okay. If we got that link, we'll put it in the description. But that's great. So if you go to vinfoundation.org, and then from there, vinfoundation.org/resources, and one more slash, but you can probably find it from there.
Then vets, the number 4, and then vets. And there's also support for support, which is for veterinary support staff. So, technicians and.
Okay. All right. So it's for any of the team members of a veterinary team. And
students too.
And students as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. But that's great. That's excellent. And I guess to wrap up, what's one thing that you would love to leave with our listeners before we end this episode? What's one piece of advice or a suggestion that you have for people to really help them to,
Well, because I can't follow rules, I had 2 for this.
Go. All right, two works.
Speed round. 1 we've already been over, which is advocate for yourself, and 2 is Black Lives Matter.
As an African American Black male, I can agree with both of those. As a well-being enthusiast, advocate for yourself, and Black lives definitely matter. I really appreciate that, and Matt. And this has been absolutely phenomenal.
Let's leave on a really lighthearted note. And Gavin is, for whatever reason, he's like slap happy right now or something. But he's like super. Did you hear this animal?
No,
he thought it was going to end.
Matt, I'll warn you, these can get a little crazy, so I have no idea what they're going to say. But the first one is, would you rather eat a whole bag of marshmallows or a whole jar of peanut butter at once?
I mean, I'm just going to be that annoying guy who's like, how big's the bag and how big's the jar? No, I'm going marshmallows. Because I think it's just easier. Like, peanut butter's so dense.
It is thick. It's Number 2, would you rather be able to record your thoughts like during the day or your dreams while you sleep?
Oh, that's a good one. My dreams, I guess, because what's stopping me from recording my thoughts during the day? Like,
well, you have Renee, what's the statistic? Like 80 million thoughts a day.
So you have upwards of 50,000 thoughts a day, but I'm with Matt on this one because at the very least, we're conscious enough to sort of capture some of those thoughts. And I don't know that you all want my thoughts recorded, but my dreams might be worth their weight in gold for sure.
It's recommended that you write down your dreams in the morning when you first wake up, because there are oftentimes messages.
Remember.
Huh?
And so you have two types of dreams. You have very vivid dreams that are longer in duration, and then you have short dreams. So you have lots of different types of dreams. And
but most people don't write down even the ones they can remember, though, right?
Yeah.
I've never done that before, but it's recommended. Okay, and last but not least, so Matt wants to record his dreams and not his thoughts, and he wants to eat a bag of marshmallows instead of a jar of peanut butter. Would you rather wear a monitor that beeps when you're lying or beeps when you're attracted to someone? Oh, God.
Oh, that's easy.
Which one?
Attracted to someone.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I guess as a married man, you have to say that, right?
But really, though, that could get you into trouble, though, right? Like, I guess.
No, that could make me some new friends. It's a good icebreaker. It's a good. Like, you just look at the ring. I'm off limits, so we don't have to have that conversation.
Yeah.
I love your thinking, man. I love your thinking. Okay, yeah. This has been great, man. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, likewise.
I'm sure our listeners.
Where can people get more of you? Yeah. You have. Let's hit them with your social handles, Matt. Where can people get more of you?
Okay, my Instagram handle is Holland DVM. My Facebook is like, just look me up on Facebook, because almost all my posts are public. And I post like everything on all 4 of these platforms. My Twitter is Doc Holland. I think no, that's my LinkedIn is Doc Holland, and my Twitter is Holophant, like an elephant, but Holophant.
Yeah, we can throw those in the show notes as well. And
we'll put them in the description. And with that being said, this concludes another episode of Exploratory. Get Motivated Exploratory, where we explore all things related to veterinary well-being, and sometimes more like would you rather eat, or would you rather record, or so forth and so on. So with that being said, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Renee. And we'll catch you guys on the next one.